Hi everyone, welcome to the newest video on the channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how I painted the mountain that rides for a Song of Ice and Fire miniatures game. This is actually quite a big model, but it's really fun to paint. Because there are lots of flat areas, some parts can be quite long, but I wanted to show you every brushstroke that I did. So if you like the way that this looks, then I suggest you continue watching the video, and thanks for watching. Because this figure is so big, I start with the armour as it's essentially covered completely by it. So I come in with my base colour. That is Foundry Metal, Wargames Foundry Metal, and it's a triad, so you get A, B and C. Now I just use A and C, and A is the darker colour, so that is my base coat. Now you can use whatever colour you normally use for this. Obviously everyone has their own colours. I don't really like to say what colours I'm using besides really specific ones, because obviously everyone uses different ones. So use a silver colour that you use for most of your metallics, or the darkest one that you have, and begin base coating with that. Now you can see that my brush is quite large and it's really old, but this is perfect for doing large surfaces of metal on the whole model for a base coat. Now at later stages I do use a smaller brush to create my highlights. This just makes it easier to get into little spots and is a lot more precise, but at this stage you don't really have to be precise. Obviously you want to be as neat as possible. You can see where I'm kind of going over black parts there. It makes no difference because obviously we're going to be painting different colours over that, but be as neat as you can, but using a brush like this makes it a lot quicker and easier. Now when doing this base coat, you can see that I'm doing on the armour on the horse before I start doing the armour on the mountain himself. Now I do this because it means that I can check to make sure that all of the parts that need to be painted are finished before I move on to the next section. This just makes it a lot quicker in the sense that you don't have to keep on going back over things that you've already base coated. So you know, if you miss a part of this silver and then you start base coating the yellow and you think, oh, I've missed that silver part, you have to go back again, so that takes you even longer. So just make sure that you turn the model around and do one section at a time before you move on to the next section. It's just a nice little tip. Now I'm using this colour essentially straight from the bottle. It's diluted enough for me that I'm happy to use it straight out of the bottle for the base coat. Some of you might like to dilute metallics. Some of you might not like to do that. So do what you like, but you can see the consistency of the paint that I have here. So if your consistency is quite similar, then use it straight from the bottle. Obviously you want to be careful that there's not like bits of dried pigment and stuff like that in, which obviously putting it on a wet palette or a palette of some kind removes the chance that you get that kind of stuff in, but use it if you like. Now the consistency is good enough so that it covers the majority of the black undercoat. Now I've used the black undercoat because it's perfect for this model, because there's so much silver, and although there is a lot of yellow on this model, it's not really that hard to do yellow over a black undercoat. It is harder than other undercoat colours, but I think because the majority of the model has other colours on it, a black undercoat is perfect. Notice how I keep on turning the model to make sure that I've got all the parts before moving on to the next section. You should constantly do this with any stage. It's just a good habit to have. So yeah, if you can learn anything from this, try to start using that habit a lot more. Now I will be trying to simulate a darker shade of metal on the mountain and the horse's armour to represent the fact that it's not been taken care of as much as maybe it should be. Now it is described as being like a kind of blackened steel, so it is actually quite easy to simulate that kind of effect, which I'll obviously be showing you at a later stage. Now the mountain does have Mal at the back of his legs. I'm not really being super careful with dry brushing so that every link is defined at this stage, because obviously when we do a wash at a later point, that will actually sink into the recesses and actually show each single link. So don't be spending too much time trying to dry brush the links individually. Just kind of get the paint on there, get a nice solid base coat on. You don't want to be seeing too much, like I said, you don't want to be seeing too much black undercoat. You want the consistency of the paint to go on well enough so that you only have to really do one layer of this. Now, you could spend extra time doing 2 layers. I don't think it's worth it because we are going to be washing this model, so you're still going to have black over it anyway. So don't spend loads and loads of time doing multiple layers trying to build up a solid colour, because it will just be wasted. Now, you will notice that I do not paint the sword blade, the blade of the sword. Now, I do this because I need a point of contact to hold the model without actually constantly touching parts that I've already painted. Now, you'll see this more at later stages where I've painted like the cloak and stuff like that, but I don't really like, I'm sure a lot of you have done it before, where you've painted a part of the model and then you touch it and it kind of makes like a rough surface. I don't want that to happen on this model. I mean, I spent quite a lot of time trying to paint it. So keeping that point of contact on the sword, keeping it unpainted, means that I can constantly use my finger to touch that point, so that I'm not messing up parts that I've already painted. Now you can see that I'm constantly turning the model, making it easier for me to get all the parts that I need to get. Don't forget the arm that's his shield arm. Obviously it's in a position that you don't really look at, so make sure you get that. Make sure all the parts are properly done. Make sure the helmet's done properly. Turn it, get in all these dodgy parts as well, even parts that you wouldn't normally paint. It's worth doing for the sake of completion. Now at this stage, I decided to neaten up areas that I was a bit messy with using black. Now this part is optional, and in hindsight maybe it probably wasn't really worth it, because I still needed the base coat a lot of other colours anyway. But on the other hand, it was useful because I could kind of have like a good look at what parts need to be what colour. When you start with a new model, especially a one-off model like a character model like this, you don't really know what parts are what unless you've actually really taken a proper look at it before you've base coated it and stuff like that. But yeah, do this stage if you want. Like I said, you can leave it if you want to. If you do leave it, obviously the model will look messier and messier, but it doesn't matter because obviously you're going to be base coating it anyway. Now, I thought I'd do this obviously because, like I said, I need to figure out what parts are what colour, and 2, I think for tutorials, when a model looks messy, when you're looking at it on YouTube or anything like that, when they're neater, you know exactly what parts should be what colour. So I'm just doing it for ease of the viewers, all of you, to make it more obvious what parts should be what colour and what parts shouldn't be that colour. This part that actually does take a bit of time to do. At later stages where I neaten up, it doesn't take as long because obviously there isn't as much black on the model. It's simple, really. Again, you can see that I'm turning the model quite a lot to get into these really weird angles. I'm focusing quite a lot on the arms here because they actually will be black at a later stage. Now, keeping the black parts black is good, but it's inevitable that you're going to get those black parts colours that you don't want to. Like I said, in hindsight, this stage is actually kind of wasted because I did actually kind of mess it up again. So if you like, just skip this part and move on to the part where we begin to do the yellow. But at this point of the video, we're not that far away from when we start doing the yellow anyway, so you might as well keep on seeing what parts I paint black. And when doing this, obviously you don't want to get too much black on the metal because it's kind of counterproductive. But again, just be general with this. Don't have to be super neat with it. just do the main obvious parts that shouldn't be metal. And then after this, we can move on to the next stage. Now with the cleaning up finally done, we can actually move to the largest part of colour on this model, which is the yellow. Now as you can see, the colour that I'm using as a base coat is essentially like an orangey brown. Now this is tan from Foundry, Tan C. I think it's a really good colour to start off doing any yellow colour, simply because it actually has pretty good coverage. Any orange, or any mid-orange tone that kind of looks a little bit brown is actually a really good colour for a base coat in yellow. Even like a brown, like a mid-tone brown is really good to be a base coat for yellow, and then you can build it up from that. Now as I'm painting, you can see the consistency of the paint that I'm using. Now it's quite a milky, milk-like consistency, and it doesn't have 100% coverage over black. Nothing really has great coverage over black, like 100% coverage over black. So we will be doing 2 base coats of this, just to make sure that the colour is solid. We want the colour to be solid because for yellow, if you have like a kind of dark, undercolor, like a base coat essentially, and you try to paint yellow over the top of it, it looks really washed out and dirty. It's not really like a smooth transition. So having a solid base coat, whatever colour it is, I suggest obviously using a colour like this. You want it to be solid. Now, as I'm painting, you can see I'm actually missing the bottom part of the barding. Now I want that to be black for multiple reasons. One, I think it breaks up the model from it being completely yellow. I think a completely yellow model is just too much sometimes. And 2, it's actually easier to leave the black parts underneath. The barding underneath black. It's a lot less complicated to paint black underneath a horse's body than it is yellow. Yellow would just be way too complicated to do. So leave them parts black if you like. If you don't want to leave them black, try and paint them yellow. I don't obviously have any way to show you how to paint yellow underneath there. You just have to be careful, because obviously you don't want to be painting over the horse's legs and stuff like that. So just be careful. Paint this guy, like I say, I'm leaving the barding black underneath, and I'm going to do the same for the cloak. Now I think this just breaks up the model. If you actually look at the front of the model, the yellow barding is actually quite overpowering. So if the bottom part of the cloak was also yellow, I personally think it would just be too much. So having that black has a nice kind of transition. I mean, like I say, you don't have to do that if you don't want to, but black is a lot easier to paint than yellow as well. So if you don't want to do, the humongous amount of yellow, then doing selected parts black actually might make this model a lot easier for you to do. As you can see, obviously I'm turning the model, making it easier for me to get into, constantly checking what parts need to be what colour, what parts need to be this orange colour. Also notice how in some parts that I'm painting, I have quite a lot of the colour on the tip of my brush, and then other times when I'm painting finer parts, I don't have as much on. So don't put too much paint on your brush when you don't need to. Obviously when you paint large flat surfaces, you want to have a decent amount of paint on your brush. You don't want to have a little bit on your tip, because obviously it will take you all day to paint it. So make sure you have the right amount of paint on for the actual part or the section of the model that you're actually painting. Now on these large flat surfaces, I move the brush quick. I don't want the paint to be drying whilst I'm putting on another part of paint, because obviously the surface of the paint will dry in some sections and not be dry in others, and it will rip the paint. So once I've done a section, mostly, although they're still black underneath, you should wait for that to dry, or I wait for that to dry before going over it again. But we're going to be going over the whole thing again after this anyway, so don't try to get full 100% coverage in one go. It's just not possible. So take your time, be patient, and it'll all be a solid colour just at a later stage. With the shield being, having detail on it, it's got the three dog heraldry. I'm not being, super careful with it. Now, this is actually an easy way to paint the shield. If I painted the shield rim silver at this the stage that I painted the armor, then you can see how much orange I would have on it already. So that's why I didn't paint it silver at an earlier stage. Now, obviously with the dogs, I don't want to completely paint the dogs orange either, because they've got to be black. But it's inevitable that I'm going to get orange on them. So try to be as neat as possible around the edge of the dog. Like I say, you're not going to be 100% neat. It's just not possible. But just be careful when you're doing it, and you also don't want there to be too much pooling of colour on the rim of the shield. So make sure that it's a smooth, even layer around it. And because this colour's been watered down pretty significantly, it is important to make sure that, as well as there not being any pooling on the shield, you don't want pooling anywhere else on the model. Now, this is obviously going to be in the recessed parts mostly, so check to make sure that there's not too much. Now, you don't want this to be thick, because you start to lose detail on the model. So just go over the parts. Now, you shouldn't really have loads and loads of pooling at this stage. If you do have a lot of pooling, I'm 95% sure that your colour's probably going to be too watered down. So if you have a lot of pooling problem, make sure you actually have more paint than you do water. Now, whilst I'm doing the cape, you can obviously see that there are quite a lot of recesses, so I'm being careful not to get too much in too much paint in them parts. And I'm again moving the paint quickly, because I don't want there to be some parts that are dry and some parts that are wet. So you start from one side of the model and move to the other. Now, you can start from the top and work your way to the bottom, but you don't want to paint from the left and then do a bit on the right and then do a bit in the middle, because at some point during that process, one side of that's going to start drying, and it's just going to be a thick, a thick layer that's of broken paint that's just not smooth. So work from one side to the other, top to bottom, or bottom to top, whatever you want to do, but do it methodically. You can see how I'm keep on turning the model to make sure that it's easier for me to paint. Now, always turn the model to make it easier for you instead of turning your paint hand. You can see throughout the whole video, my paint hand essentially stays in the same place, and it's my left hand, or the hand that I'm holding the model with. Now, obviously if you're left-handed, you'll hold the model in your right hand. But always turn the hand that your model is in to make the model easier for you to paint. Now, I'm going around to the front of the mountain. Obviously, now I've essentially completely done the horse and the cloak. I can actually start the actual mountains tabard. I think, if you want to call it a tabard or something like that. So I'll start doing that, and I'm being careful not to get any on the metal. Now, I'm pretty sure I did get a bit of orange on the metal here. Now, you can just go back over it with a base colour, because obviously at this stage we're base coating the model. Now, obviously you don't want to keep on doing that, because it will just take you loads and loads of time to keep on going over. So only really go over the parts that you've made a mistake on if it's so obvious that it's there. Obviously, if I had a massive blob of orange on the in the middle of the horse's armour at the back there, then obviously I'd cover that. But if it's just a little touch of orange on a kneecap or something like that, don't worry too much about it, because we're obviously going to be painting over that at a later stage. Now I'm getting into the more detailed parts. I start to put less paint on my brush so that I'm a lot more controlled with it. Now obviously there still is a pretty decently sized surface area, so I don't want to put so little on, but at the same time be careful with what you're doing. Again, like I say, if you can be neat, then be as neat as possible, but it's not of the utmost importance at this stage. Now you can see where I kind of brace my arm against the table there, so that I have as much control as possible. Now there's loads of different ways that you can control your brush hand or your model when you're painting. You can brace against the table, you can push your hands together, and you can also hold your breath, and of course you can put all of them techniques together to get, you know, essentially the best stability that you can get. So yeah, if you need to be more stable, if you think your hand's a bit too wobbly, something like that, try some of those techniques to be a bit more stable. Now again, I turned the model around, I forgot that side there, so turned it around, made sure I go all the way around with the orange. It is a part where you don't really look at, but again, like I said, for the sake of completion, try to paint all of the parts of the model that you can get your brush into. It just makes for a much better model. And also, you know, when you're playing with it, or even if it's part of a collection and you don't even play with them, you'll always know that part's not been painted. So for me personally, for the sake of completion, I do the parts that I can. Now obviously I do miss parts that are so hard to get to that, you know, there's no point in even trying to get them. Obviously, you know, parts like underneath the horse and a horse's belly, there's no point in trying to paint that on this model because that will never ever get seen. But for parts, you know, like the shield, the bit of cloth that the shield covers, it's worth trying to do. With that part finally done, we should let this part dry, and we can move on to the next stage. So the next stage isn't actually much more fun than that stage, because it's the same colour, same consistency of the paint, but now that the colour's been put on and dried properly, now make sure that the colour has dried properly. You leave it for 5-10 minutes. Make sure it's properly dried, because obviously you don't want anything ripping or making a rough surface. So come in with the same colour, same consistency, and begin to paint over it again. Now you can see obviously that the paint has dried and it's left like a black undercoat. Now you don't want this to be there, like I was mentioning earlier. If the undercolour for yellow is like a dark colour, it means that the transition is just not going to be smooth, and yellow obviously is a lot less forgiving than other colours, so having a smooth transition is more important. So this stage won't take as long as the first stage, but it is still an important part. Now, because it's obviously the same, I don't really have much different to say besides obviously keep it neat. Don't keep on going to the recesses. Obviously the recesses are going to be dark anyway, so you want to be doing the flat surfaces that are the raised edges. Now getting familiar with these edges and how they look is important, because these are the edges that you're going to be highlighting yellow at a later stage. So if you can kind of familiarise yourself with what parts look more raised to at this stage, it'll make it a lot easier for you to highlight the yellow later on. Now as I turn the model, obviously it's a lot more of a prime example for you to see that the orange doesn't really have like 100% coverage. Obviously on that cloak there, at the middle of the cloak, that's not you know, fully covered, so obviously that's one of the main parts that needs to be covered. Again, be methodical with everything that you do when you're painting. Do one section at a time, and it makes it a lot less tedious. And you can see parts where obviously the orange has dried over parts that shouldn't be that colour. No, that's not a problem. Like I said, at this stage it's just base coat. We've only done the silver and the orange at this stage, so don't be too worried about parts that are looking messy. This will all be neatened up at a later stage. Now you can see there where I finally done like a the last colour of the orange, and you can see how nice it looks when it's actually one solid colour. And this is the kind of effect that you want to be getting with yours. So if you do a second layer and it's still got a bit of black on, maybe it'll be fine, but you want it to be looking essentially as close to mine as possible. So if it does still look like the cloak at this stage in time after you've done a second layer, you may have to put a little bit more paint on and do a more solid colour. Again, you don't want to be doing too many layers that it becomes thick and you lose loads and loads of detail. So just be careful of that when you're doing it. Again, obviously turn the model to make sure that it's easy for you. Obviously at this stage I don't need to, because obviously this area is nice and large. I did get a weird bit of pigment in there which I was trying to get rid of, so again, be careful of that. Not all paints have that kind of dried pigment in. It's just this colour kind of dodge, which is actually quite annoying. Yeah, just be careful of that. Make sure that the colour is solid. I'm being more careful with the cloak here because it's actually one of the more focal points. So yeah, on focal points, try to make sure that they look the best. You can see there now that that's kind of gone on solid, that it looks a lot more brighter, vibrant, which is the effect that I want, and obviously you want if you want to do a nice bright yellow. So while it's done, obviously turn the model. Again, I keep on saying turn the model, but it's one of the most important things. Keep on turning the model to make sure you've done all the parts that you need to do. I don't think there's anything worse than painting a model and then realizing that you've forgotten something after you've spent hours doing it. So again, I'll say it again, turn the model, make sure parts are gone. Even there, see, look, I've got another part of pigment there. If I left that to dry, that would have been really annoying to get rid of. So yeah, see, look, I've noticed that. I'm spending a bit of time to make sure that's nice and smooth. Got that out, and that is the base color for the orange finally done. And once that's done, I come in with a black again. Now this stage is similar to the first stage. You can do it if you want to, you don't have to do it if you don't want to. Now I'm doing it, like I said, because it makes it a lot easier for you all to see what parts should be what colour and what parts shouldn't be that colour. And also because I just think having a neater model to look at when you're painting makes it a lot more inspiring. Obviously having a model that's really, really messy, all the time that you're painting, it makes you think, well, I've been painting it for hours but it's not getting anywhere, so I'm struggling a bit with this. So for the actual mental side of painting, to kind of stop that that wall of this figure is not going to get done, neatening it up sometimes can actually make quite a lot of difference. Now I'm not doing this on all the black parts because I'm still going to be messy. So like I said before, just be doing it on the parts that are the most prominent parts, the most obvious parts that are black, or that should be black, sorry, are black, and try not to get it on the cloak like I did there. And that's the quick cleaning up stage done. So now we're going to be getting on to the final stages of colour before we do the washes. So I start with a brown on all of the leather parts. Now this obviously includes the belt, the straps, the reins, all of this kind of thing. Obviously the shield as well, don't forget the shield. Now you can do the shield black, you can leave it black, or you can do it brown. I do it brown because that's what I've done on the other models from Army. So for the sake of continuity, I do it brown. Obviously because you've done the orange here, be using a a neat brush, or as neat a brush as you've got, and put only a little bit on the tip of the brush so that you can control it as best as possible. Now you can see there where I'm placing on the tip of the brush as lightly as possible and then slowly dragging out the paint so that it's more controlled than normal. Now in comparison to the base coat that I was doing for the orange and the silver earlier, where I was being a bit heavy handed with it, it's a complete 180 with the heavy handedness. Obviously make sure you get all these little parts. It's quite important to do this. Yeah, like I said before, you don't want to be missing something out and then paint the model and go, oh, I've missed that part. That's quite annoying. So make sure you check all the parts. There are times on this model where I do actually miss certain parts. So, even though I do turn the model all the time and tell you all to, constantly turn and check, I miss stuff myself. So there will be parts in this video where you think, oh, well, that part wasn't painted, but it's painted in this this next clip. And that's where I've looked, taken a step back from it and looked at it and gone, oh, I've actually missed the part there. So yeah, like I say, if you're doing it, because it's such a big model, you can miss quite a lot of it. So when you do a stage, once you do this brown part, stop, take a look, go and have a look to make sure you've done all the parts. Now at this part in time, I'm painting the model and I'm doing the brown, and I'm thinking, well, that part of his reins there, actually I'm not happy with that being dark. So I was originally going to do it black, but I thought that's just going to be too much black. The heraldry for the mountain, or for the Clegane, House Clegane, is yellow, mostly yellow with black dogs. So I thought, well, I'm going to try and put as much yellow on as possible on the model without overpowering. So yeah, whilst I'm doing this brown, I think, well, I'm going to do that orange at some point. So again, when you're painting, you will probably change your mind about what you want to be brown, what you want to be orange, what you want to be black. So again, because it's your model, do it however you like, to fit your idea of how you want the model to look. So you can see how I'm doing the final parts of the brown now, just making sure that everything is essentially kind of like a solid colour, making sure that I've not missed anything, and finally doing the last part of the brown, which is obviously the saddle, there. You can do these straps and stuff different brown colours when you're highlighting, but I think for a base colour, just a generic dark brown is a nice solid colour for any brown that you want to highlight up with. So don't go too crazy with all these different colours at this stage in time. Just keep it basic and make sure that the colour looks solid. Next stage before we start doing washes is the gold. So I come in with a base tone of gold. Now obviously, like I said before, with any of the other colours, you all probably have your own that you use often. So use the darkest tone for the gold for this, and I'm obviously going over those parts. Now I want to keep the gold on this as little as possible. Now although this is a character model, and the mountain is used in the Lannister Army, I want it to be kept to a minimum because I want him to look more grim. So I'm only really focusing on the stirrups, the sword, obviously the sword guard, and a few clasps on the horse's reins. Now obviously you can do different parts gold if you like. You can do the kind of like the fist on his, I've seen people do the fist on his helmet gold, or like a bronze colour. You can do the ridges of the horse's armour gold. You can do anything that you want, but when you're using the gold colour, make sure that it's like the darkest tone that you would normally do, essentially just the base tone, and get a decent coverage on. Now you can see that I'm being obviously careful around the hands and stuff like that, even on the blade, even though that's obviously not been painted yet. But again, to get better at painting, try to be as neat as possible on every stage, even if you don't have to be. Obviously I've done that side, I turn around to this side, make sure that I do all the parts that need to be done. And obviously this is quite a quick and easy stage, nothing too complicated. You can, like I was saying before, you can also see that I have, in between this clip and the last, painted the reins orange, ready for that yellow highlight. I think that looks a lot better now. So if you like the way that looks, then you can kind of do the same thing. I think it looks way better than it being black. Makes the horse tie-in a lot nicer. Again, make sure the horse's details are, the claspings on the reins and stuff like that are painted. You can do these silver if you like, but I think because the majority of the armour is actually silver, the gold breaks it up a little bit without the gold being too overpowering. So with the rest of the model done, I can now actually start doing the rim of the shield now. Maybe this stage can be left until later, because obviously we still have to highlight the orange up to a yellow now. If you're confident that you can be quite neat with the yellow highlighting at a later stage, then go ahead and do this, the rim of the shield now. Obviously paint it silver, same as the other colour. If you're not super confident, I would leave it until after we've painted the yellow. Obviously after we paint the yellow, we still have to be neat when painting the rim, but when painting the yellow, we can be a little bit less tidy, because obviously you can paint over the rim. So I go ahead and do this, and I also, whilst I have this colour out, I go around over the rest of the model to make sure that I've not got any colour on the metal that I don't want to be on there. So, be careful when you're doing this. Obviously you don't want to get any on the orange, otherwise you have to go over it again. But this isn't too complicated. I've not got too much paint on my brush, and that is done. So for this stage, make sure everything is properly dry before coming in with the first wash colour. Now we're going over the orange parts first with a flesh wash from Games Workshop, Reikland Flesh Shade. Now this is a brilliant colour for yellow, or oranges and golds as well, besides obviously flesh. Now you can see that I am coming in with quite a lot on my brush, but I'm not I'm not drowning the colour in it. I'm trying to get into the recesses and controlling exactly where I want it to go. Now it doesn't really matter if you get any on the armour, the silver parts, because we're going to be going over the metal whilst this wash is still going to be drying. Now I use it on the orange because I think it makes a really nice subtle shade on the overall yellow effect that we're going to be achieving later on. And I didn't really want the mountain to have the most vibrant yellow colour, so this works brilliantly for the effect that I'm trying to make. You can see obviously that I'm making sure that I go over all of the orange parts. I don't want to be missing any of the orange parts at this stage. If you do, you'll see a massive difference in between the different tones. If you compare the orange to a tone where you've washed it in comparison to a part where you haven't, it'll just look way too bright. So make sure you get all the parts. You can see on the shield here where I get a bit on the rim. It doesn't really matter, but I just take it off anyway. And it is of the most importance not to get pooling it in the shield, because otherwise it makes it really hard to highlight. So put enough wash on to make it so that the orange is like a dulled down tone, but then drag off the excess or the excess wash so that it's not drowned by it. You can see obviously on these flat areas where it's more more obvious at what parts need to be shaded and what parts don't be, but again the whole part needs to be washed with this colour to make the blends that we're going to be doing with the yellow a lot smoother. So here, obviously on the cloak, a lot of wash on the brush, and I'm dragging it out over to make it nice and even. Again, you want the recesses to be nice and covered, but not too much. You can see where I'm finally doing these last little parts, making sure that there's nothing pulled around. Again, same thing as always, turn the figure, make sure that everything's done properly. If anything catches your eye straight away, it's likely that it shouldn't be there, so just take it off. So whilst the flesh wash is still drying, I come in with Nuln Oil, so it's a black, nice black wash, brilliant for metallics or silver, and I'll come in quite heavy with this. Now, like I was saying earlier, I want the armour for the mountain to look really nice and dark, so I do come in quite heavy with this. Now the problem with coming in too heavy with a wash all in one go is that it'll pull loads and loads and loads. Now you can see how much wash I had on my brush there, because it even fell off my brush and fell onto the paper that I have there as a background. Now, although I do have a lot of wash on my brush, I'm still being careful with it. Now, because the wash on the orange parts, the flesh wash, is still drying, I don't want to get any really onto the orange. Now it doesn't really matter if, you know, where orange is close to the metal legs, you know, the metal parts, you know, like the legs there or the barding. It doesn't really matter if it gets in between those parts, but you don't really want to have black on the orange. Now that's because the orange will just start to look really washed out and dirty, and that's not the effect that I want. You don't want to really do a black wash on orange, it just is counterproductive really. So focus mainly on the armoured parts, the silver armoured parts. You can do it on the gold as well, because there's not a lot of gold on this figure. A gold that's washed by Nuln Oil won't really look much different to a gold that's washed by like a brown wash or something like that. You can see how I'm being careful with the shield rim, and I do get a bit on the orange. All I do is just, you know, mop it up a little bit. That's all you need to do. So if there's too much pooling, just dab it off. You can dry your brush, dab it off. It's really easy to get rid of. I do the back of the shield. I'm being really heavy with this. Like I say, I want him to look like he's been in battle, and it, you know, is not looking really after his armor that well. So come in heavy all over the face, get nice into the detail, and with the maul, you know, the neck protection, and also on the back of the legs, you want to make sure, like I was saying earlier, because we didn't dry brush the maul, these parts now need to be properly covered by wash so that you can see the individual links. Shoulder plates are a nice point of you know, of attention on the model, because they're quite interesting. So make sure that they're done properly, and they show up really nice later on when we highlight them. So cover them properly. Make sure, you know, the back of the armor's done on the horse and stuff like that. I nearly actually forgot that, so make sure you don't forget that. All them extra little parts, turning it around, make sure there's no pooling, and then move on to the next part, because obviously some parts will start to dry. So if you have an area of the model where parts are pulled quite a lot, and then you take it off, actually it will still show like a kind of ring of where the model was drying, in the part of that model was drying. So you want to quickly move and remove parts of the model that have been pooling. And once those final little bits are done, make sure obviously everything is properly done. And it looks, it should look dirty, it should look like there's quite a lot on there, but that's good. That's exactly how we want it to be. And once that's finally tidied, we need to wait for that to dry before we can move on to the next stage. This is it fully dry, and it looks really nice, but the armor's still not dirty enough for me, still not dark enough for me. Again, this is described as being black and steel, so I do the same thing again with Nuln Oil. Go over it with exact same amount of washer as I did in the first stage really. You want to get it in all to the details, and this is mainly for making the big flat surfaces look really, really dark. Now, you can look at the armour now and see where the highlights would be, and the Nuln Oil, making it darker makes the highlights even more exaggerated, which I think is a really nice effect for this armour, because only doing the extreme highlights on blackened steel makes it look even darker, and it's a really nice quick effect. I think at this stage though, when you're doing the Nuln Oil, it's even more important to be careful about not getting it onto parts where you don't want it to. So just be careful, make sure you turn it to make it easier to get into more awkward parts, whilst also not getting on anything else that you shouldn't be getting it on. Now obviously not all parts of this model that are silver will need to have more Nuln Oil put on there. You don't have to do it if you don't want to, obviously. I'm focusing mostly on the parts that I think need it, so the large flat armour plates on the horse, the face protection on the horse, the legs of the mountain, and obviously the helmet. Again, be careful not to have too much pooling on this. Actually, you don't really want much pooling at all anywhere. This effect can be applied to any model really. It can be applied to gun barrels where you want them to look nice and sooty, or something like that. And it's a really, really quick and easy way to do it. Again, I go nice and heavy on the face and nice and heavy on the shoulder. I don't think I bother doing it on the shield rim, because the edges of that are going to be highlighted anyway, so there's no point in going too mad with that. Like I say, as always, turn the model, make sure it's working for you, do all the parts that need to be done. I try to make every part look as dark as every other part of the armour, because obviously you don't want one part to look too out of place in comparison, but at the same time you can obviously see what parts will need it more than others. Obviously that depends on how much wash was put on a certain area in the first place. You can see how nicely the orange actually looks now with the flesh wash, and also the fact that I do decide to do the shield. So yeah, you don't have to do that. I don't think that was actually really worth it, but if you think it needs to be done, then do it. Make sure everything's nice and tidy, no pooling, and that is that second black wash done. Now finally the black wash has dried, and you can see how dark it looks now, and now it is time to actually start highlighting it. So I do come in with a nice tidy brush, nice neat fine detail brush, and I have a little bit on the tip, and I'm focusing only on the edges of the armour. Now thankfully the model actually has really nice detail, a lot of edges, not a lot of sharp detail and stuff like that, so you can see what parts you want to be highlighting. Now obviously whilst you're watching me, you can obviously see the parts which I pick out, which I think need to be picked out to kind of show how the armour actually looks. Now with this with how dark the armour is now because of the Nuln Oil, you don't want to be going over it way too much, because obviously you're kind of counterproductive with it. Doing the edges kind of represents the fact that those edges look more worn, and the light hits them, reflects off that part a lot better. Now these stages are actually quite long, because obviously the model is so big. So I'm essentially going to be giving you the same kind of commentary over certain parts. Now I also do sometimes apply lines to flat surfaces, like the horse plate and stuff like that. And this represents scratches and battle damage. Now you can skip this part if you want to, but I think that it actually kind of adds a nice effect and depth to the dark armor. So obviously in comparison to other armor or swords and stuff like that, where you have like a nice shiny surface, having some scratches on there with by doing some straight lines and stuff like that actually adds a nice extra level, if you want to call it that, to your model. I remember, notice how I only have the smallest amount of paint on the tip of my brush when I'm doing this, and even if I have too much of paint on my brush, you can see on my thumb there where I drag off the paint to make sure that I'm not going too heavy handed with it. Like I say, you're only trying to do the most sharp edges on this. Again, make sure to turn the figure to get into awkward places. And another thing as well is, if you think whilst you're doing this stage at any point, should this part be highlighted, 9 times out of 10 I'd say probably you shouldn't be highlighting it. So if you're in a mental battle with yourself in regards to whether a certain part of this armor should be highlighted with the silver, then don't bother doing it. It's also the same with getting into really, really awkward angles at this point. Because it's a highlight, it should only be highlighted if it is on the raised surfaces or the edges. You can see when I do the mouth as well, that I am being careful with not getting it into the recesses where the wash has gone. So be really light with this. I think this stage of painting is actually quite fun, because you can actually start to see it come to life. I do the metal first, because I think because there's so many stages of yellow, if you get a bit of silver onto the orange at this stage, it's not really a problem to correct it. Whereas if you did the yellow first and then go onto the silver, then it's actually a nice quick and easy fix. So doing it this way round is just a lot easier. Now on the metal plates of the horse, there are really prominent ridges that are highlight. So although this is prominent, I think you should do this part nice and slowly, as painting lines actually isn't really that easy unless you're been painting for a long time. So go nice and slow with this, because it's obviously one of the main focal points of the armor on the horse. You want it to be nice and neat in effectiveness. Now, I mentioned this tip earlier, but you can use your hands and push them together and brace them against the table, whilst also holding your breath to kind of make the the ultimate stability if you do struggle with painting lines. This is a really good technique that that a lot of people use. So pulling the model closer to your face as well when you're painting actually makes it a lot more comfortable for you. Remember, we want the armor to look nice and dark, but we want the edges to look nice and prominent. So only do the most extreme edges on these parts. Again, don't forget to do the rivets and stuff like that. Make sure you go all the way around. Again, I try to do the horse first before I move on to another part of the model. like I was mentioning earlier, this stage is really fun, because obviously you can see the model coming to life, and it's actually not really a long stage in the painting process for this. Obviously the longest part of this model is the yellow, but it's not going to be hard for you, you all that are watching this tutorial. I've tried to make it as easy as possible. There is a lot of layers to do, but doing multiple layers isn't the complicated part. The complicated part about painting is being patient with it. I think that's the hardest part to learn about, sitting down and painting. And I think the best way to be patient when you're painting is to have be in a state of mind where you want to paint. Not all the time, professional painters don't always want to paint all the time, and it's their job. A lot of people don't want to do that, but do their job, depending if you like it or not. But my point is, you should be in a surrounding or a setting where you feel comfortable and you want to paint. That's the best way to get better at painting. Be comfortable. Put a film on in the background, put a bit of music on in the background. You can watch you're painting Game of Thrones figures, so chuck a Game of Thrones episode on, or if you play the game, put a battle report on, and it can inspire you to do even more models. Now, going back to the actual painting, the armor of the horse is really nice because it has so much detail on. So the ridge of the actual faceplate and stuff like that is really nice. Now the eye protection, I did kind of dry brush over that, and it works really well. So you can do the same. I think it works really well, but focus mainly on the top part so that the underneath looks like you've kind of blended it in. So you don't want the whole thing to look really shiny. So you can see now that a lot of the horse's armor has been, edge highlighted and stuff like that. And you can see how the darkness of the Nuln Oil is still representing how dark the the metal actually is on this model, which I think is really nice. Now, if you actually don't like this kind of representation of the armor, then obviously you can do it in your own style. You can do it the same way as you do normal armor. Make it a little bit more shiny and stuff like that. But for, I think, the time that I've spent on it and the actual final effect, I think it is a really great trade-off. And at this stage of the model, you also don't get a full representation of how it actually will look at the end, obviously because everything else hasn't been done yet. But as the model starts to come to life even more with the painting of the yellow and everything else, it just pops even more. Makes the rest of the model pop even more, because you have a nice comparison between the darkness of the armor but the brightness of the heraldry of the mountain. So as with the armor on the horse, the mountain himself has really nice prominent detail. And it makes it just so much of a pleasure to paint. Now, if you make a line that looks a bit too light in comparison to everything else that you've been doing, just wait for it to dry. Don't go crazy trying to fix it straight away. Just wait for it to dry, and then you can go over that area with a nice layer or two of Nuln Oil again. Obviously, making sure that both layers a layer dries properly before moving on to the next layer. As I was saying, when I was doing the Nuln Oil wash on the shoulder plates, they work really well with the silver highlight, because obviously they have these studs on, so it's a nice point of interest on the model. Obviously make sure that you pick all of them out so that the model pops before moving on to the next part. Again, it's the exact same on this side. Make sure the most prominent lines over the edges are nice and highlighted properly, representing the fact that that part of the arm is more worn than other parts, and the light hits it better. If you want to do a straight line on the edge of a part of detail, you can use the edge of your brush and kind of drag it across that line to make it easier for you if you struggle slightly with painting straight lines. You can see there on that the elbow, the armour on the elbow there, where I'm not going all the way crazy with going all the way around. Now that's because obviously the light isn't going to be hitting underneath, and like I was saying, you don't want to be painting parts of the model that no one's going to be looking at anyway. Obviously you want the that part to represent the fact that it is metal, so it should be base coated wholly in metal. But when you're highlighting, only paint the parts that will be hit by light. Don't make something harder for yourself. And be careful with the fingers here. You obviously want to represent that each one is an individual digit, so try not to get any in between the gap. Just go slowly with that. Same thing around on this side. Again, not going too crazy with over highlighting or anything like that. And the last part to do now is the helmet. So again, same with the rest of the armor on the mountain. It's really nice detail. It's got a nice visor. It's got nice, breathing holes in effectiveness. They're really nice. They're essentially just circles, so you can follow them nice and easily. Just go slowly with details like this, because obviously the face is a point of the part of the model that your face is drawn to when you look at it. Again, around the edges, the digits on the curled up fist, you want to be making sure that you represent each one of them as a single rather than them all being blended in together. So just be careful, do that slowly. The detail is nice on this, so you can see what you want to be painting. Again, I'm turning it around, constantly turning, making sure I'm doing everything that needs to be done. You can see on metallics, when you have certain lights, now I think you should be painting with lights when you are doing this, when you're doing any kind of painting. So you can see it's very, very prominent on metallic colours, even though there has been 2 non-oil layers on this metallic colour. But you can see in the light where natural highlights hit the model. Now you can turn the model to see where, if you're struggling to see where a highlight might go in that specific area, turn the model in certain light to see how light actually hits it, and then you can just follow the line that actual natural light causes on the model. So on the face a bit earlier there, on the side of his helmet, there was a nice natural line there, so I followed that with a bit of silver, and it looks really, really nice. So use your use natural things to make the model look more natural, and you can't go wrong. So now we can finally move on to the longest part of the model, which is the yellow. Now you can see actually where I've kind of gone over the silver there and just gone a bit more crazy with the highlighting. You can leave that stage, but I've kind of done it to make it look like I've kind of buffed back. I think it looks nice, but you don't have to do that if you don't want to. It's just another extra bit of detail on there. So going back to the yellow, we come back in with a third layer of the same base coat that we were using in at the start. Now, you have to do this layer. Do not skip this layer. It's so important. You do this to redefine the large, flat surfaces of the model, so that there's an actual depth to the yellow. Now, this means that every colour that you put on top of it is a lot more smoother. If you have a kind of dodgy base colour for yellow, it just doesn't look smooth. So this is really, really important. Now, it's not a super long stage, because obviously we've already got the colour on the model, and obviously the recesses are really prominent because the wash has been put on. So you want to be careful not to put any paint in the recesses. Be careful, don't put too much paint on the brush when you're doing this, and just go over the main folds of the cloth. Now, obviously, like I say, I try my best not to get any of this colour into the most prominent recesses, but because this stage essentially isn't really a highlight, you should be quite bold with it in parts where you think the cloth should be an actual yellow colour. So don't treat this as a highlight. Treat it as a redefining the layer before we did the wash. Now, the wash, you might think, oh well, why did we do a wash then? Well, the wash is important because it adds another layer of depth to the material. Now, I did it because obviously I didn't want the yellow to be too bright, because obviously I wanted him to look like he actually has been fighting, and he's not looking after his stuff as well as he should be, really. So if you want to have a nice bright yellow, then go ahead and skip the shading stage with the wash. And if you skip that, obviously you wouldn't need to do this stage that we're doing right now. So whilst I'm painting different parts of the cloth on this model, you can actually see where the other parts that I've already gone over have started to dry, and you can see how it actually starts to look really nice and prominent and vibrant. This is the effect that we're going for on the whole of the model. It looks smooth, it looks solid, and having a solid foundation for colour before you move on to a highlight just means that it makes it a lot easier for you in the next stage. So I think with this model, being slow, precise, and focusing on this part will make your model look even better. Again, with every other part, I try to do one section at a time. It makes it a lot quicker, a lot easier, and way less tedious. I was actually going to do, the yellow on the horse first, and then highlight it all the way up, and then do the yellow on the mountain. That actually, in hindsight, probably would have been easier and way less annoying. Because painting a lot of yellow in one go, especially on different parts of a model, is actually quite complicated. Especially, I think maybe it was kind of multiplied because obviously I had the camera there, so it makes it a lot harder to get, bring the model close to your face and stuff like that. Now, if you do want to do it, like I mentioned, obviously doing it one section at a time, then go ahead and do it. I think if you don't plan on spending, all of the time off you have one day, on a weekend to paint this model, then I think doing a section at a time so that it's completed, will maybe be a bit more rewarding for some people as a painter. And I know not everyone has a lot of time to do 5 hours of painting in one day. A lot of people do like an hour or two every day, or maybe an hour or two every week. So I think when you have a figure that's so massive and you try to do the whole bulk of something in one go, it can seem like you're actually never getting anywhere with it. So if you want to do a section at a time, even if you want to do, you know, 1/4 of the horses barding at a time and fully highlight that up, then go ahead and do it. Do it how you feel is easiest, you know, is best for you. Now, I personally would have felt like doing the horses barding completely first would have been best before moving on to the mountains. I don't think doing, you know, 1/4 of the horses barding at a time is best, because I just feel like it would just multiply the time it takes to do it. I just feel like I would just be getting nowhere with it. So if I was to break it down into sections and give you some advice on how to do it, I would have done the horse first, do that completely, and then do the mountain. So I could have sped up this this video, because obviously I'm essentially doing the same thing over and over again. But I've decided not to, because I wanted to show you each brushstroke that I do. I think because yellow is such a complicated colour for some people to do, especially on a black undercoat, I wanted to show you every single brushstroke that I did, and show where I've personally placed my highlights. So if you wanted to, you could actually, you know, stop at certain parts of this video and look at me and go, well, he's put that highlight there, so you know that works there, so I'm gonna copy that. So if you do feel like that works for you, I'm gonna be really happy that I've kind of helped someone out with this model. So you can see as I turn the model, you can see the parts that I've actually already painted, and see how nice they look. So we want to obviously do the same thing on this side. So it's the exact same thing. I'm not going to keep on saying the same thing over and over again, but make sure the main parts are redefined again, ready for the next highlight that come in, and the recesses, remember the most extreme recesses have the shade colour in. You can see that part there where I've been painting. You can see the comparison between that and the darker tone of the orange on the cloak. You know, obviously that it's a nice comparison, because obviously the cloak has actually quite a large surface area. So the smoothness and the solidness is what we want to have on the whole thing. Don't forget, obviously, to paint the parts, you know, in the nooks and crannies with this colour. I wouldn't go too crazy with doing it with the yellow, because obviously the shading would make it look like a darker tone. So when it gets to more complicated parts, then you may as well just leave it as the orange tone. But at this stage, be careful, be neat, and obviously when you're doing parts where it's next to the metal, you want to be nice and slow, because obviously you don't want to be getting any of that colour onto the parts that you've already painted, especially now the fact that it's fully highlighted. Now, everyone makes mistakes when they're painting. Don't get annoyed at yourself if you do get it onto some of the metal that you've already painted. It's an easy fix. So you know how we done it. You know, paint a base colour over the part that you made a mistake on, wash it a couple of times, and then highlight it once with a really light silver. It's not a hard technique, and you know, if you do make a mistake, it probably won't be over the whole lot. So everyone makes mistakes and everyone learns from mistakes. So don't be annoyed when you do make them, if you do. See, I turn the model there, and you can actually see how it's kind of started to dry nice and smooth. And in comparison there, obviously you can see how the cloak is at this point in time. So I start to begin with the cloak. Now this part is fun, but you have to be careful because there are quite a lot of recesses. So you can see at this point in time where the most prominent edges are. So just follow them. And like I was saying before, this part isn't really a highlight. It's just a redefinition of the orange base coat. So treat it like that. Don't be doing too stark a highlight. Obviously when you start to highlight something up, you start to do less and less and less and less until you've done the last highlight. This is not what we're trying to do here. We're just redefining those solid orange lines and leaving those gaps. You can see there, obviously, look, that part, maybe if you was highlighting that, then maybe you would have left that part. See how I've gone through that and just left the most prominent, deep ridges of wash. So maybe that gives you a kind of idea of what I mean by redefining the orange parts that should be orange, should be yellow, I mean, and leaving the deep recesses. Now I'm going over parts that I've already painted because the paint's still wet. If you don't work as quick as me, don't keep on doing that because you're just going to be mixing wet paint with dry paint and just going to scratch the surface up and make a rough surface. So only do that if you're moving quickly with a brush. Otherwise, wait for something to completely dry first before going over it. Otherwise, you're just going to kind of just break the surface and it's not going to be a smooth transition. Obviously, if you wet your paint on a wet palette or something like that, then your paint might still be wet enough to do that. So if you're confident that it's not going to rip the surface of the paint, then do it. Otherwise, wait 20 seconds because that's all it takes to dry. So wait a bit. Remember, be patient. Patience is the key to get into the next level, and then you can do that next layer if you feel like it needs to. I'm nearly done with the cloak now, and you can see how much has changed, and you can see there, obviously there's still a few parts as I turn it that maybe need to be a bit more orange. So I turn again, constantly turning to see what parts need to be done and what parts don't need to be done. If I've got too much in one part and too little in another. And again, going over it again. That part's slightly more dry now, so I can go over it again without breaking the surface. Now with the shield, you can see me turn the model to make it easier for me to paint. Now, always turn the model to make it easier for you to paint. I've said it a million times in this video, and I'm going to say it a million times in my future videos. Turn the model to make it easier for you to paint. I remember when I started painting years and years ago, and I was cack-handed, and I was told just to turn the thing, and it was like a new invention to me. But you don't think about doing it until someone tells you to. It's not always a natural a hand movement for some people when they're painting, especially new painters when they don't know. If you're a new painter, you obviously don't know every technique, and even professional painters don't know every technique. So use the advice and just turn the model, and it could change how you paint a model. So now that first layer is done, we can move on to the first actual highlight colour for the yellow. Now this is a yellow, the actual yellow that I'm going to be using for the model, mixed with the original base colour. Now it is very subtle, but it makes a lot of difference to be very, very subtle with the first highlight on the yellow. Now if you went straight in with a very, very bright yellow, it could just look like you've painted yellow over orange. But if you start to mix, like this is essentially a 50-50 mix of yellow and the base colour. If you do a mix, and then after that mix you use the brighter colour for the next highlight, it makes a much smoother transition. So what I'm doing is I'm going over the areas that we redefined with the orange, and I'm now starting to act as if we're highlighting. Obviously we are highlighting now. So when you highlight, obviously you paint over those defined lines, and you leave a bit of the old colour in the recess, and obviously you highlight that up more and more, and that creates your transition, your smooth and your smooth blends. Now with yellow, you have to do quite a lot of layers to make a nice solid smooth yellow colour. Now I think on this model we did 2 base coats of orange, 1 orange redefinition colour, and then this is the first highlight, so that's 4 levels, 4 layers I mean, and then we do 2 actual yellow highlights and 1 final edge highlight, so that's 7 layers. Now that may sound like quite a lot, but for a lot of yellows, it's actually not that many. And obviously when you get to a brighter and brighter yellow, you just do less and less of the model. So actually at the later stages in time, it only takes a minute or two, 5 minutes max to do one of those layers. So actually it's not taking you forever and ever to actually paint those highlights. Like I said, I use this colour because it makes a nice smooth transition. Please do use a 50-50 mix of the base colour and the yellow before you actually go straight into the yellow. Now yellow's arguably the hardest colour to paint besides white, and this is simply, in my mind, due to the fact that you have to have so many layers to create a solid colour, and that's just due to the pigmentation that's used in yellow in comparison to the more solid colours like red, blue, green, stuff like that. The key to getting a nice solid yellow is patience. As I said before in my first video, if you're struggling with a model, take a little bit of a break from it. Now this video is 2.5 hours long, and that's obviously with a few edits and stuff like that in, and in actuality it probably took me around 3 to 4 hours to do. That's including priming, waiting for drying times, and basing. Now let's say it took me 5 hours, so double the time that the video actually took me. That includes me taking breaks in between the model. Now it is hard for some people to, and this might relate to you, this might be painting for 5 hours from start to finish for one model might seem quite a tedious task, but if you break it up into 5 1-hour sections, it's not tedious at all really. And obviously you're trying to paint a model. If you've come to watch this video, hopefully you've come to actually paint the same model, or try to learn how I did the yellow for this model, or maybe you're just painting the mountain on foot and trying to see how I did that. How you could use these techniques that I'm teaching in this video to you for that model. But the same thing goes for any model you're painting, not just this one. Breaking it down into more manageable sections is the best way to paint something that's going to take you more than a day. If you are planning on finishing this model or any model in one day or one session, then breaking it down into different parts just makes it so much easier for you to do. There's loads of different techniques you can do. You can if you're painting say multiple models that have yellow on, doing all the yellow on them at once and then moving on to the next part, maybe doing all the leather straps after that. That's the quickest way to do it. So break everything when you're painting, break everything down to make it more manageable for you, so it makes it more enjoyable. And I think that's the most important part. When you're in this hobby, you're not doing it to make your make your life harder. You're doing it because you want to. So make it as easy and enjoyable as possible. So going back to the actual painting, you should be turning this model to make it easier for you. Now this, saying turning actually at this stage is actually very important, because the lines are much easier to paint at certain angles, and you can actually see if you look at the model there, you can actually see where the more prominent lines are. But if you look at them from a different angle, they might not seem so prominent from that angle. So turn the model, if you're not too sure on what part you want to be highlighting before you actually start highlighting it, turn it in different lights, different angles and stuff like that, to see what to you looks like the most prominent line to actually highlight. Now obviously in the previous stages we did try to paint the most prominent line, so in effectiveness you should be essentially following those lines that you already painted, but you may have missed something. So you're obviously not going to get everything 100% right straight away. So I'm like here, I decided that part needs to be a bit more prominent than maybe I decided in the earlier stage. So I just go over it. Don't be afraid to change a decision that you made at an earlier stage of painting. Just go over it. Remember, everything can be changed. It's just a model. So you can change colour, you can change technique, but don't be afraid to experiment with what you want to happen. The most important part about this stage, though, obviously because we're getting into a nice bright colour now, is that you need to make sure that you don't get any colour in the recesses. Now if you do get colour in the deep recesses, I think one of the easier ways to correct it would be to use the original colour that we base coated with, and then paint that on the section that you made a mistake on, and then wash that with the flesh shade, and then tidy up around the edges of that mistake with whatever colour stage that you're on. So if you're on like the first yellow stage and you get a bit of yellow into the recess, paint the mistake with the base coat orange, and then flesh wash it, and then obviously you can tidy the edges with that yellow that you're on to obviously make it tie in more. Now it might look a bit out of place, it might take a bit more than, I've kind of described it quite simply there, but it might take a bit more doing than that, but essentially that's the fix that you need to try and make for just a little mistake that you made. So don't go too crazy if you do make a mistake at this stage. There's always an easy fix for it. Now again, I try to keep the paint wet, not too wet that it starts pooling in places where I don't want it to. So you can see as I'm painting, the consistency of the colour that I'm using is enough to not seem like it's kind of washed out by the colour underneath. Now, as I was saying earlier, the pigmentation of the yellow paints that the majority of us use is way less than other colours, so it does take multiple layers to get a solid yellow colour with any of the yellows that we are using. So don't try to keep on going over and over and over and over one part before it's dried. Remember, make sure it's dry first, let it dry for 30 seconds or 20 seconds, that's all it takes, and then go over it again if you feel like it needs to be a more solid colour. This cape's actually starting to look really nice now, because you can actually see the lines that we want to be painting on, so it's quite fun to go over it again and actually start to bring this cape to life. And it does look, painting base coats on colours where they're actually nowhere near the final colour can be a bit daunting at first, because obviously you think, well, it's going to take me forever and ever to get to that final colour. But we're on the fourth stage of this highlight now, and you can start to see how nice this yellow is coming on now, and how smooth the transition is without actually too much effort. Again, this is all about patience. 4 layers isn't really that much if you actually look at what we've done on the rest of the model. And you can see how the brightness of the yellow has a nice contrast between the dark steel on the mountain and the horse. And moving on to the shield, it's the same as what I did with the first orange layer, but I'm kind of watering this down a bit more now. I don't want it to be too thick, so I'm kind of feathering it out. Now, feathering is essentially putting on an initial bit of paint, and then using like a dryish brush to you want it to be dry, but you don't want it to be bone dry, and you kind of drag the brush really quickly into the surrounding darker areas of paint, and what that does is it kind of creates a nice smooth transition in a very, very quick way. So you see there, I put on a nice dot of paint, and then I quickly brush up, down really quickly to smooth out the surface and blend it into the colour that's underneath to make a nice transition. Now you can do this as many times as you like to create a solid yellow colour, but because this isn't actually yellow at this point in time, I only do one layer, and that is the first layer of the orange. And now we can actually move on to the next part, which is actually yellow. Remember, make sure you wait for that to fully dry before moving on to yellow. And look how nice this colour's going on now. The first actual yellow colour. So this is obviously the yellow that you mix in with the base colour. Now you want to use the same colour. Don't be using a brighter colour. Use the same colour that you mix into the base colour, but just use that by itself now. And obviously you want to water it down a little bit. Like I was saying before, though, some colours, some yellows actually come quite watery anyway. So maybe experiment on one section to see if it goes on smooth enough and solid enough, and then see if it needs to be watered down or not, and then start painting. So again, we're going over those lines that we've created, and obviously we're painting less and less now to make those transitions smooth. It's important when painting yellow to not go over a layer that's drying. I've said this on all the other colours, but I'm going to say it again because it's really important. It will show even more on yellow if you keep on going over, because obviously the paint surface rips. So wait for it to fully dry before going over it again. Take notice of how much paint, or how little paint, I actually have on my brush at this stage. Now you don't want to put too little on, because it'll just feel like you're painting, you're painting a wall with a detail brush. It'll just take you hours and hours and hours. So put enough on for the situation that you're, for the surface that you're painting. And this will be different for different surfaces. Obviously on the larger, flatter surfaces, I'll put more paint on. On the more detailed surfaces that are closer to the metal, I'll put less paint on. It's just try to be logical with how much paint you have on at a time. You can see how that yellow is a nice a smooth transition from the first highlight that we did. Now you can use this yellow and highlight with the same colour once the whole surface is dry as many times as you want to make the colour more and more and more vibrant if you want to. Now this is something that that people tend not to do too much. Obviously they just get bored of doing it, but I think being patient with it and doing it to something where doing it to a level where you're actually satisfied with it yourself is important. Now whether that be you do it once or whether it be, you do it 10 times, do it as many times as you feel works for you for that certain model. Like I said, once the paint starts to dry, you see how it all starts to blend in really nice. And that's the same with any colour really. When the paint goes on wet, it's not always a representation of how it will actually dry. So bear with the colour that you're painting sometimes. If you think it goes on a bit too bright, wait for it to dry properly. It may even take an hour to dry properly. This is especially the case for skin tones, I think, where I think certain highlights of skin tones actually blend in really nicely once they've properly dried with the previous colours underneath. So it's the same with yellow. Make sure it's properly dry, make sure you're happy with it once it's dry, because that's an actual true representation of the colour that it actually is. Like I was saying, if you find the yellow doesn't actually have good enough coverage, wait for it to dry before going over it again. And if you're painting and you feel like, well, I'm painting this and yellow's not showing up, I'm 99% sure that you're likely have the paint watered down too much. So just add a bit more paint to your wet palette or whatever you're diluting your paints on, and try using just a bit more paint pigment and less water. With this, I honestly think I've probably used about 75% paint and 25% water. It's probably not even that much water, because obviously the yellow is diluted quite well itself. I'm using Vallejo yellows for this, and like I said at the start of the video, I don't really say all the colours that I use and from what manufacturers, because everyone has their own manufacturers that they buy their paints from, and you know, most of them are colour for colour really. There's a few obviously niche colours, but yellow, this is just a generic yellow colour. It's nothing special. It's just, you know, dark orange, yellow, and light yellow. So you know, if you have those paints in your box, then use them ones. So you can see where on the tabard, where I kind of paint a prominent line and feather out that into the larger flat surface. So use these techniques to make a smoother blend if you're struggling on flat surfaces. Flat surfaces are quite troublesome to highlight sometimes, because you think, well, it's a large round flat surface, so the highlight will actually be the whole surface. So you know, the highlighted part would actually be a whole surface if the light source was in a certain place. Now on a miniature, obviously you don't want to be painting everything in the highlight colour, so feathering out something into a large surface actually is just a nice representation of the fact that that surface has been highlighted. So use the feathering technique to blend in a highlight colour into a large surface if you don't know exactly what you want to do. With the reins now, I'm starting to just do more edge highlights. I don't want to be doing too much on the actual, the middle part of the reins. But actually, when I paint it, I look and go, well, it looks a bit too orange for me. So I decided to do a a line in the middle to represent like another fold in the material. Now you don't have to do this if you don't want to. If you're happy with the colour that you have, then leave it as it is. But I'm painting yellow and I don't want it to look orange, so I just do that to redefine, like you see that there, just to make definition for another layer of cloth. Just adds another little bit of texture to the model. You can see how this actually, starting from orange, is actually now starting to become a nice warm yellow now. And look at that, as you turn it you can see the comparison. And again, it's the same thing on this side. Be careful with the reins. Do the edges. Make sure you turn the model to suit the part that you're actually painting. Don't break your hand trying to paint something. Turn the model to make it comfortable for you. I actually feel like this side of the model is nicer for yellow, simply based on the fact that the folds look more prominent on this side. Maybe it's just from the fact that the cloak is on this side, so the yellow is a lot more vibrant and striking. Like a focal point on this part. So yeah, you can see how much yellow I have on the brush there, because this part is a large flat surface, and you see how it kind of comes off the brush and works there. And I do get a bit too much in the recess there, so I wash my brush, make sure there's no yellow on it, dry it, and then scoop out the paint where I don't want it, and it's a simple fix. Then come straight back in with the yellow again to redefine that colour. Again, everything that's a mistake generally has a really easy fix. So try and work quickly if you make a mistake. If you don't work quickly, don't worry about it. But I think with experience comes speed and stuff like that, so everything's all just time and patience. You can see there where I'm feathering out the yellow, because I'm not super confident on which parts maybe should be recessed. So yeah, use that technique when you're not 100% sure what part should be most vibrant. On a side note, you can see here how the orange on the cloak has nice depth and smoothness to it, and that's only using two different colours. One, obviously the orange multiple times, the shade, and the orange yellow mix. So essentially you could call it three colours if you like, because obviously the shade counts as one. But see how vibrant and smooth the transitions are based on there being, 4 layers of paint on there. It's really, really nice. Well, I think so anyway. Now going back to the yellow now, turn the model, obviously try to do these awkward little parts. Now I'm doing that part there because obviously if you look at the models from a sideways view and look in between his arm, you could still see that part. So I do paint that yellow because obviously I don't want that to, it's not orange, it's meant to be yellow. But in the weird parts of the model that actually are kind of hidden, don't go crazy with trying to get yellow on those. It's just too much hassle for reward, really. Yeah, it's not really worth it. So do the parts that are obvious and then leave the parts that aren't so obvious. So we're finally getting to the last parts of the horse's barding now, before we move on to the cloak. And again, it's the same thing. This part is actually a lot easier because I think it's more obvious what parts should be highlighted and what parts shouldn't be. And again, there I'm feathering out parts where maybe the colour looks too bold in comparison to the rest of it. So when you're painting, it's not always about just putting paint on, it's about taking paint off in parts where you don't want it to as well. So just remember that. Again, redefining that nice crisp edge, turning it to make sure that I've done all the parts that I want to do, and then I can finally move on to the cloak, which is the fun part, especially now that we're doing less and less highlighting. So come in with the edge, start from left to right, like I said before, start from one side and move on to the other side. Don't go from one part to another, be methodical with it. So I come in with a small amount of paint on each part when I'm doing this cloak. Obviously, that's because it's more detailed than there's less large flat surfaces on the cloak. So a little bit of paint on, feather it out. If I want to redefine it, I'll go over it again. Now I'm still following the highlights that I did at the on the first stages of this model. Now at a later point, the final highlight, I'll actually be following the ridges or the actual crisp edges of the yellow. So I'll explain that more later on the last highlight, but it's important to know what part is edge and what part is the cloth that you're defining as being a raised area. But at this point in time, we're painting the cloth that's a raised area, and obviously leaving the darker orange in the most prominent recesses. Obviously, less and less each time as that goes on. So you can see how the yellow blends in really nice with that orange, and it's still wet at this point in time, so it's not even fully representing the colour that it'll actually be when it's dry. And you can see there as well that I made a bit of a mistake, and again, simple fix by just drying the brush and scooping out the paint in the area that I don't want it to be in. Again, when I want to be quite straight with my brush or paint fine detail, you can see how I put the brush onto the part where I want to be painting and then slowly move the brush in comparison to parts where I put the brush on and quickly move it. So use your brush in different ways for different techniques that you're trying to represent on the model. Now with the cloak done, you can move on to the shield, and again I water this down a bit more than I do with the rest of the model. Now this is obviously because feathering the shield instead of painting it is a lot easier, because we have a rim and the heraldry as well to paint around, which is kind of annoying, but it's not that hard to work around. Again, if you didn't paint the rim at the start, then you can be a bit more messy at this stage. But obviously, again, you want to be neat and you want to be leaving more and more of the darker colour in the recesses of the shield, like the rims of the shield, and also between the black parts of the dog heraldry. So you can see there where there's still parts of orange on that shield, and it still looks the same colour as the actual cloth that I have on the model. Again, make sure there's not too much pooling around the shield. Turn it to make sure that all the parts are yellow, and that's that. So you can see now that the yellow looks really, really, really bright in comparison to the last stage. That's because I've gone over it one more time in that same colour. Now, as I was mentioning earlier, you can leave that stage if you want the yellow to be darker. I did that because I thought it just looks nice if I do one more layer, and it's not a different colour, it's the same colour, just one more layer. So if you want to, you can go over one more time. But what I'm doing now is the final highlight for yellow on this model, and that is essentially yellow mixed with white, or the yellow mixed with ivory. I choose white at this stage, but you can use ivory if that's the only colour that you've got. And you're following at this point, you should be following the lines which the cloth is creating itself. So we're not trying to follow too much of the lines, like the large flat lines, but more the creases of the cloth that's being made naturally. That the sculptor obviously creates the edges of the cloth and creases where he wants them to be, and they're the parts that we want to be following. And because this part is so bright, and I want the yellow to be, kind of like a not super vibrant, I'm being very careful not to do too much of this colour. This side of the model, the video looks actually kind of overexposed where I've not properly focused it, so you might not be able to see how bright this yellow is at this stage. But once I turn it around, you can actually see how bright it is in comparison to the rest of the yellow on the model. But this is the same I'm using the same technique here as you would do if you were edge highlighting. So just do the edges and the most prominent features of the surface that we're doing now. So obviously the cloth, just do the most prominent edges. Don't go crazy with this colour because it can start to make it look a bit too bright for what you're trying to represent. Now with the tabard here, obviously I'm doing the armpit there, and the creases in the cloth. Obviously they're the prominent lines, and obviously above the belt that's a prominent line. So that just defines the material that I'm trying to represent. Again, turn the model to make sure that it's easier for you to get into certain recesses. Now that this is obviously the brightest colour, you want it to be in the parts that you want it to be in. So try to keep the lines as straight as possible. Again, hold your breath if you need to. It makes it a lot more controlled when you're doing brush strokes. So this colour is actually really good because you can over exaggerate highlights with such a bright colour, and a lot of you may not be using these kind of really bright highlights on your models, but using a bright highlight in comparison to the colour that you actually want the surface to be is actually a really nice way to take your model to the next level. Now, it's not always the case, but when you're painting kind of higher fantasy kind of models, Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer 40k, anything like that, over exaggerating a highlight can make it look really nice and vibrant. This doesn't always work with models that are kind of historical, true historical miniatures, but on things like this where it's actually essentially fantasy mixed in with historical kind of things, it works really nice. Now, like I was saying, because the exposure is actually not so bad on this side, you can see how bright the yellow that I'm using is and how little you actually need to make it look like a new highlighted layer. So follow the most prominent lines and don't do any more than that. It's bright enough as it is. This is literally like I don't even know what colour you would call this. This is like an icy yellow, maybe, something like that. And you can see how quickly this stage is, because obviously there's not much to do on it. I actually find this stage really satisfying, and that's not only because it's the last part of the yellow, which obviously took them the longest time, but it's because you can finally see how all of the layers actually combine together and look really nice and smooth. Now, if you wanted to, make it even smoother than me, then you can just do more and more layers, slowly building up lighter and lighter, and you could even go all the way up to white highlights if you want. And that's what I was saying about going over the top with over exaggerating highlights. You can highlight yellow with white if you want to at the most extreme level. Now, obviously, for time for time and reward, I think this level of yellow is perfect for the model. So obviously we do everything before we do the cloak, besides the shield, to make sure that those parts are all properly done. And the cloak is the most satisfying part, I think. Remember, just the edges, and like I was saying, we're just doing the edges now. We're not following like the large flat surfaces. We're just doing the most prominent creases in this cloth. So you'll see here, these two creases are obviously quite obvious what we're trying to do with it. Remember, just the topmost part. I do feather out a bit there because I feel like it needs to be. And this is the part where you can actually start to see what I'm talking about with the most prominent line. So here, the kind of like U-shaped crease there is obviously very prominent. So topmost edge of that, and you can see how nice and bright that becomes. And just a little bit there, because obviously that's still an edge, but it's still not as much of a crease. And then here, it's the same as like the left hand side, where it's a very, very prominent line. And obviously the same part there. But the part that I was talking about was the the bottom middle half of this cloak. So once I do this side, you can see how I follow the kind of curvature of the cloth, because that is the prominent line on that part, and that joins up to it as well. But I'm not doing anything else besides obviously the edge of the cloth. They are the prominent edges, so only do those parts. Don't go crazy with anything else. That is what you call an edge highlight. Again here, just follow that around because that's the edge. Do the actual proper edge because it's called an edge highlight. And that's the cloak done. Now with the shield, this is the easiest part of the shield. Because all you have to do is go around the rim of the yellow. Now obviously you still want to have that kind of gap in between the silver and the yellow. So like that dark gap, obviously where the wash was dried and made the kind of shading. But doing this kind of edge, like a straight line, brings out the yellow, makes it kind of nice and bold. I did decide to feather out a bit of this bright yellow in the middle parts of the shield, just to bring it out, make it pop a bit more. Also on the bottom part as well there. You can do this, you can leave it if you want to, but I think it just adds another little layer of texture. That is that yellow on the model finally finished. So at this point I do go around the model with black to neaten it up. Now if you didn't do this black neatening on the earlier stages, which I did, then I do suggest that you actually do this now. Now it's messy for me, but if you didn't do it in the earlier stages, it's probably likely to be more messier than what I have it. So do go ahead and do it now, because we will be highlighting the black parts of this model soon. So it's important to get it nice and solid black colour. Also, don't forget to do the heraldry on the tabard and the shield, because Clegane colours are yellow and black, so be careful when doing this black on the heraldry, because you don't want to be getting loads of black on the yellow that you've already painted, because it's just counterintuitive. Now because I've been painting for so long, obviously I'm kind of used to doing this kind of detail, so I'll just go nice and slowly with it. I have the smallest amount of black paint on my brush, and that is because even if I did make a mistake, because I've got such a little amount of paint on my brush, it wouldn't even be that noticeable. So all I would have to do is just add a little dot of yellow onto that black, onto the black part where I've got it on the yellow. So what's true here is that less is really more. So just go slow with it. Don't put a massive blob on the tip of your brush. You really don't need to, and try to use the tidiest, neatest brush that you have, like the most detailed brush that you have at this point in time, because it is very, very important that you try not to get any black on the yellow that you've already done. Remember to turn the model to make it easier. This is most important on this stage, because the detail is in kind of awkward place to get, and obviously because the model is so big, it doesn't always fit into your hand as ergonomically as you might want it to. Constantly making sure that I do it all right, even turn the model upside down, and even actually move my hand in a bit of an awkward place there to make sure that I get it how I want it to be. Again, there, see how I put a bit of black on my brush and it's still too much, so I just drag it across my hand to get even less on my brush. I do paint parts black here that maybe don't really need to be painted black. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm doing this to make sure that as a viewer what parts should be what colour and what parts shouldn't be that colour. So with the sword blade there, that didn't need to be painted black, because obviously I still have to paint over the actual blade itself silver. I'm also painting the horse, the skin of the horse black, or the skin of the horse black. That's because I want this horse to be a dark colour so that it doesn't detract from the yellow on the model. I was originally going to do it a dark brown, but I just thought that would have been too much effort for the model, and I would have had to get brown underneath the legs and behind the cloth and everything like that. It's not worth the hassle, so I didn't do that. I just decided to keep it black. Now notice how slow I'm going on the parts of the shield heraldry. This is, they do kind of make it easy for you because obviously it's such a raised surface, but at the same time you still have to be careful. I do turn it to make sure that the lines that I'm painting are as straight as possible, and then obviously I'll just follow just trace around the actual outline of the dog. Now I do actually put black on certain parts of the shield where the heraldry actually joins the shield, but that is just the smallest amount. Now I do that because I don't really want to see yellow on the dog, because the dog's meant to be black. So I do go a bit not overboard with it, but a bit more finer a bit more finer than a lot of you may want to go. But if you do want to go a bit further, do try to do like a thin layer between the actual dog heraldry and actually where it meets the shield, so that yellow doesn't look like it's actually on the dog, which is how I think it should actually be painted. Now obviously not everyone has this kind of level of patience, or maybe people don't even want to get to that level. So if you don't want to do that, then don't bother trying to go too mad with it. The tip, the key here is being patient and also putting a really, really small amount of paint on your brush, whilst also bracing your hands together and holding your breath. So there is quite a lot of, you've got to also think about quite a lot of things whilst you're doing this this stage. So don't go too crazy if you can't manage it. Again, if you do make a bit of mistake on this yellow, it's an easy fix, because all you have to do is just put a bit of yellow on, or a bit of yellow on the parts that you make a mistake on. Because the stage is the stage of yellow is actually done now. All you probably have to do is put a mid-tone of the yellow on, and then just highlight it up with the brightest yellow, and then just feather it out to make it blend in. That's probably all you'd have to do to fix a mistake if you made one. Now notice how I don't finish one dog and then I don't finish one dog completely and then move on to the next one. I tried doing that with the top one, but I found it was just awkward for me. My hand wasn't working that way. So what I decided to do was keep the model in the same facing, and then paint all of the dogs, all of the dog parts that I could do at that angle before turning the model around to do the other half. It's simple. I was telling you about not making the model awkward for you to paint, but I was making it awkward to paint for me there. And I realised myself, why am I making it harder for me when all I have to do is just turn it? So turn it to make it easier for you. I've said it 1,000,001 times now in this video, but it does make a lot of difference, especially on something like this where you have to be really fine with the detail. Doing this black part on the shield actually makes the detail on the shield pop more. Obviously the yellow pop more, and I really like the way that it, black and yellow is actually a really, really nice combo for a model. It's kind of like dangerous in effect, like kind of like hazard, black and yellow or black and red. Works really, really nicely. Quite suitable for the mountain actually, isn't it? You can see how I kind of go over the top with the black definition on the dogs. So you can see how there, like the yellow's not really joining the top two dogs as much. Obviously I've still got to do the bottom dog there, but you can see how I kind of go a bit overboard on the overspill essentially with the black onto the shield, but not so much that it's obvious, so that the dog is defined. You see where I kind of make a little bit of a mistake there. Simple, because obviously the black is still wet, I kind of just dry my brush and then quickly just push the paint off. So like I say, a mistake is normally quite easy to fix. Again, I have a little look to make sure that it looks kind of symmetrical and everything that should be black is black. Because obviously the black doesn't have complete coverage over yellow, I kind of just go over a few spots there that need to be fully darkened down, and then I go on to the rest of the model to make sure that I've got all of the black parts that need to be black ready for the highlights that I'm going to be doing later on. Now this obviously includes the underside of the barding on the horse. Now, like I said earlier, if you didn't do it black, or if you did it a different colour, then obviously you don't have to do this stage, but you could if you have it a different colour, prepare it with that colour. And obviously don't forget to do the underside of the cloak. This part is quite important, because obviously you have to be careful not to get any on the yellow. So I kind of do like an edge. I use the edge of my brush there on the edge of the surface to make a straight line without me actually having to paint a straight line. So because I'm painting an edge on an edge, the brush won't go over that. So what that means is that the paint won't go anywhere apart from going straight. So it makes it easier to paint that straight line. You have to be careful though there. Obviously I was saying that the paint won't go over the edge if you do an edge highlight. That is partially true, only because if you had a lot of paint on the brush and you did try to do that, it would overspill and it would go over the edge. So just make sure you don't have loads of paint on the brush when you do an edge highlight, or It wasn't a highlight, but it was still the same technique. Just make sure you don't have too much paint in your brush, and then that won't overspill, and it will create a nice flat transition from yellow to black for you. And also, don't try to drop your figure there. That wouldn't have been good. You can see there, actually, now that the model's upside down, that I have a bit of yellow on the silver. That's not a problem at all. I don't show you how I fix that up, because it's just a simple fix of me just getting a bit of that highlight silver and just going over that. But it shows you how important it is to turn the model around into areas that, into ways that you wouldn't normally do it, because obviously it shows you, it reveals mistakes that you made whilst you're painting. I do actually find this black lining stage actually quite satisfying, because it brings out the detail on the model even more. Yeah, and it's quite satisfying to see the model slowly come together and be brought to life. This stage obviously may take a little bit longer for some of you if you didn't black line at the points in which I did it earlier. Remember, just take your time. If you're struggling with how much there is to do on this model, then just take a break. Like I say, make a cup of tea or something, or watch one episode of Game of Thrones, you know, whilst you take a break. Do whatever you want to do to make it easier for you. Your eyes might even need a rest. Everyone needs to rest their eyes when they're painting something so little for so long. Again, I'm turning the model to make sure everything that's black needs to be black. There's always something to miss, and you know, I realised there that I didn't even do the most obvious part of the model, which was the front part of the cloak. So yeah, again, turn the model, check everything before you move on to the next stage, because you're just going back on yourself if you miss something. And once that's done, we can move on to the next stage. So now the main parts of the models are done, we can actually start to do the small details of this guy, which is the straps, the leather and the gold. So I come in with a brown that I've been using on every other model in my army. So I'm just doing that for the sake of continuity. Now with the leather straps and the belt and things like that, I highlight the top and bottom parts of it, leaving the middle like the darker tone, which creates the highlight. Obviously that's essentially edge highlighting, so yeah, it's the same as any other highlighting really. Just make sure that you leave some of the darker tones when you're highlighting, to make a nice transition of colour. Because these stages are quite you know, there's not a lot to do on these stages, they're actually quite quick, so the model really starts to come together really quickly now. Again, I'm bracing my two hands together at this point, because the brown leather belt is actually in between this nice yellow that I've already done, so you want to be careful when you're doing stuff like that. The brown that I'm using for the leather straps, the belt and the saddle is all the same. Now I've done this because of a few reasons. Obviously, like I said, the brown is the same colour that I've used on all of the other models in the army, so he won't look out of place. You know, the brown won't look different to every other leather strap that I've done in the rest of the army. And also, I didn't want the saddle and the saddle cloth and everything else to be loads of different colours, because I just don't think the mountain would actually care what colour his saddle cloth would be. I've done it brown because it doesn't draw attention away from the yellow and the metal on the model. That's a simple reason why I've done that. If you want to do the leather straps and the saddle and the saddle cloth a different colour, then go ahead and do it a different colour. I've done it this all the same colour because, one, there's not enough of the different surfaces for me to actually really worry about doing them different colours, and I don't want to detract from the model. Again, don't forget to do the reins and things like that, the extra strappings and stuff on the horse. Turning it obviously to make sure that you keep the darker colour in the middle of the strap that you've been highlighting. Now this isn't an actual highlight, but for the model, overcompensating for these highlights actually makes it work really well. You notice that I don't actually highlight the back of the shield here. I just don't think it's worth highlighting the back of the shield. I've just left it that base colour and a black wash. That's all I've done. So you can highlight it if you want to, but I've not done it because I don't think it needs to be done. That's the first highlight of the brown finally done, and we can actually move on to the second highlight. Now you can skip this stage if you want. I do it because of continuity, like I said before. I've done it on all of the other models, so I might as well do it on this one. It's so subtle that you may think, oh, there's no point in doing it. So don't do it if you don't want to, but it's the same thing again. You follow the lines that you've already created with the first highlight, but you leave more of that first highlight colour underneath to obviously create that transitional colour. This stage is really, really quick. So if you don't normally do it and you think, well, I might as well do it because it only takes you a minute, then do it. I think it's worth taking your model to the next level, especially because it's a nice character. And taking your model to the next level by doing small things, in essence, actually changes a massive thing about your painting. So if you don't normally do it, I suggest actually trying it to see what you think about it. And hopefully you start to do more and more extra highlights on things that you don't normally do. In certain areas you can see me kind of dotting colour. Now this is a different technique. It's essentially stippling, not as kind of prominent as stippling, because stippling is actually highlighting with actual dots, but highlighting with dots of colour in certain places actually makes the colour stand out more than if you actually did a big line. So if you have a prominent corner or something like that, then doing one dot on that corner actually makes the colour stand out a lot. Now that's the leather finally done, and I decided to use a brown that's different for the sword grip. Now I could have done the same brown for the sword grip, but I didn't want it to be the same because obviously as the mountain is a character and he likely would have had different, someone actually make his sword to a higher level, so it would be a different colour. I didn't want to do it black, which shows what I've done on my warrior sons in the other video, so I thought I'd do it brown. Now this is really, really quick. I kind of go through these clips super quick, so make sure you do the base coat of the leather grip a solid colour all the way around. Don't forget to do anything, and that's the first colour done. Now I come in with the second highlight, super quick. You can see the actual different layers of the strapping, so make sure you leave that kind of darker gap in between those colours, and that's the first highlight done already. I'm not going all the way around because there's no need to. And this is the final highlight of the sword. So again, be super careful with this, and I'm just dotting on the colour. Like I was saying, dotting on colour actually sometimes makes it a lot more prominent than doing a line. And that's the sword grip done. Now all the brown's done, we can actually do the horse now. Now the colour that I'm using may actually surprise some of you. I'm actually using a navy blue here. Now you think, well, navy blue to highlight black, that's a bit weird. Actually it works really well for this. Now the reason why I've done this is because blue actually is a nice contrast to yellow on a model, and because I'm not doing it so prominently, it's a nice subtle way to highlight black. Now if you look at black cloth sometimes, or sometimes even certain actual horses in different lights, sometimes they do actually come across as having a kind of bluish sheen. especially under kind of moonlight or stuff like that. Sometimes black can look bluish, so I do a really dark blue for this. Now you might not even be able to properly see this on the video. It's a bit more obvious in the kind of rotational video that I do at the start and the end of this video. And I did it because I didn't want to draw any real attention to the horse that didn't need to be had. The model is all about the metal and the yellow, and I wanted to keep the horse dark to not detract from the rest of the model. So all I do is one simple navy blue highlight on the most prominent parts. Obviously the hooves, like the hair above the hooves, is obviously quite prominent. The sticky out leg parts are obviously very obvious, so do them parts. The ears, obviously, I just edge highlight the ears, and the neck and the nostrils and stuff like that. There's actually quite prominent lines of definition there, so just follow those lines. Keep it, like I say, keep it like a really dark navy. Obviously you can do your horse whatever colour you like, but I think this works really well for keeping the horse looking black, but you know, also not detracting from the rest of the model. And that is a very quick way of painting a horse on a mountain. Now obviously I left the towel and I decided to paint my finger instead. Now actually I've decided to paint the towel the same colour. Now obviously you see me using this old brush again, and I put the paint on the brush and then dry brush it off my hand. You know, brush it off my hand to essentially make a kind of like a drier brush. Now this isn't actually a dry brush, this is essentially overbrushing. Now overbrushing is basically the same as a dry brush, it's just wetter. And I'm focusing mainly on the tip of the towel, drawing it up to the top of the towel, and that's all you need to do. Now you don't want the towel to look blue because it's not a unicorn, so don't do it really bright, but you can kind of see in the light there where the blue kind of shines off, and that is all you need to do for the horse. For the next black highlight, I actually start to use a charcoal grey. Now when using grey to highlight black, you have to be careful because it can actually start to represent the thing that your paint is actually being grey. Now the way to stop this is quite evident really. It's just don't paint too much, but it's not always that easy to kind of not go overboard with grey when you highlight black. So all I'm doing here is following the lines of the creases on the cloak there, and then I'm just doing the edges of the black on the barding on the horse, and that's all you need to do. Now this difference between the grey on the black on the barding and the cloth in comparison to the black on a horse is actually very nice, as it still shows the fact that those colours are actually black but they're different. Now you could do the black on the black cloaks with the blue as well, or you could do the black on the horse grey. So do it whichever way you want. Now I did the horse blue because I wanted the heraldry to be grey, like highlighted with grey. Obviously they're not meant to be grey, but highlighted with grey. And you can see there where I'm just doing the most prominent edges of the horse. So that's the back, the face, the tail, and the feet. And I'm doing this pretty quickly because obviously I don't want to be over highlighting these parts, and they don't need to be, you know, because obviously they're not meant to be grey, they're black. Now you can see how subtle the effect is, but how much of a difference it makes. So if you don't normally do this for black, then I suggest you do actually try it. I was actually going to leave mine black, but I thought I might as well go to the next step with it, because obviously it's the character model and I'm painting it for YouTube, so I am playing with this as well, but I thought it, just to show you how to go up to the next level, it would be nice for you to see. Now obviously don't forget to do the heraldry on the tabard of the mountain as well, and obviously make sure that you do all the different nooks and crannies of the cloth for the black as well. Obviously, like I say, don't go overboard with this, because it's still meant to represent the fact that that is a black surface. This edge is quite nice there because obviously it's really prominent, so when you look at it from a glance it's black, but it's still got a nice highlight on. And again there you can see the light kind of catches that certain part, so that's the part that you should highlight. That's what I was talking about earlier with the light being used to highlight metal. And obviously with these arms here, because he's wearing a tabard, the tabard actually doesn't always go over the arms. So I've done the arms, I've left the arms black. I've seen some people paint them yellow. You can do that yellow if you want. I just, like I said, I didn't want to overpower the model with too much yellow or too much black. I wanted it to be a kind of a nice kind of yin and yang, 50-50 kind of look to it. One thing, everything's in balance with each other color wise. Obviously again I'm not going overboard with this grey, but I'm doing a little bit more on the arms because I don't want it to look the exact same as the cloth on the cloak. Again, obviously make sure you do the parts by turning it, making sure that those parts are properly done, and you can see the difference there at that angle, how the cloak looks slightly different to the black on the arm, and that's that done. Once that's done, we can actually move on to the gold now. Now these are the final parts of the model, which is very exciting. So with the gold, we move on to the mid-tone of the gold, and again, when highlighting, leave the prominent recesses, that darker tone. Obviously his sword is actually quite basic actually, so he's got those two little I don't even know what they are really, like rivets or something like that on the edges, and then leave that kind of middle tone, sorry, the middle part of the sword, the darker tone, so you can kind of see the transition of colour. Don't forget to turn, obviously same thing as I've said a million times. Don't forget to turn it. Make sure you always get the parts that should be painted. Now, I'm turning these parts because obviously those parts you can see with the naked eye without too much effort, so don't forget to do them. And then don't forget to do the stirrups and every other part of the gold as well. So obviously the left and right stirrup and the golden kind of detailing on the horses' reins, where obviously they all connect. This is a super quick stage. Obviously, because all of these parts are only got a little bit of colour on, it's way quicker. So after spending so much time on doing the metal and the yellow, this model is coming together really quickly now. There's not much left to do. Now in the same clip, I actually I don't even transition on this clip. I actually just go straight to the brightest gold, so you might not even notice the difference in colour, but I'll tell you when the colour actually changes. So once that's done, I'm now cleaning my brush, and I actually come in with a much brighter gold and do dot highlighting, as I was mentioning earlier. Now you might not even need to do this. You could highlight gold with silver if you wanted to go to an even brighter level, but this is just a colour that I've been using for everything else. So like I said earlier, for the sake of continuity, it just keeps it all nice and together, army wise. Now after doing these final little parts and the last stirrup, that is actually the gold done. At this point I decided to do the same to the heraldry. Now obviously I'm not highlighting the heraldry gold, but what I mean is that I'm going to take the heraldry to the next level. Now I come in with a very bright grey, it's not white, it's grey, and I do the tips of the heraldry in this bright grey colour. Now it is very subtle, but it's what I was talking about earlier with taking the model to the next level. Now it's not too much effort to do, it's literally a minute job, it's not even a minute long doing this part, and I'm only doing it on the heraldry. Well, actually, I do a bit on the cloth on the model as well, like the charcoal grey highlights on the cloth as well. But this just takes it to another level. Like I said, with every other part where I go a bit more bright with the highlights, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. But if you do want to try it, please do try it. It just takes the model to the next level, and you know, you'll be happy with. You won't be unhappy with it when you try it. Just obviously remember that this is meant to be subtle, so be very subtle with it, please. Again, do it on the most obvious parts. If it doesn't seem obvious to you, then 9 times out of 10 it's not going to be something that you should be highlighting. And obviously there, try not to forget the front heraldry as well. A few dots here and there, and that's the black heraldry finally highlighted. Now finally we can do the last part of the model, which is the same on most parts of my models, which is the sword, or generally the part where I kind of hold the model. Now, as I said at the start of the video, I do this obviously because I don't want to be touching parts that I've already painted. Now obviously you can see me touching the parts that I've already painted on the model there, but that's because I've varnished the model at this stage. I'll just do a quick one so that I don't brush off any of the paint that I've done by holding the model a little bit. Now you could do this on other stages of the model, but I don't suggest doing loads and loads of, you know, like a varnish at each stage, because obviously you just have too much and it'll just become really, really shiny, or you'll start to lose detail. Now here you can see that the sword is darker. Now that's because I've done a single wash of Nuln Oil, the same as what I did on the armour. Obviously just one less layer. Now I did this because I want the sword to look brighter, and I didn't show you it because obviously I showed you how to wash the model earlier, so I didn't want to bore you with 10 seconds of me washing a sword. So I focus mainly on the edges and the middle ridge of the sword. Now if you're happy with the effect of this, then keep it as it is, but I actually don't like the look of the sword being just as dark as his armour, because I think, well, if the Mountain's actually proud of anything, it's his battle prowess and his weaponry. So I thought, well, his sword would probably be more well used and cleaner and shinier, you know, more battle ready than his armor would be. So I thought, well, I'm going to go shinier with the sword. So I actually decided to actually do the edges of his sword in a brighter colour, just by going over it multiple times. You can see that I do leave the bottom of the sword closer to the guard darker. Now obviously that's in keeping with the fact that the Mountain has darker metal than everyone else. So do that obviously to kind of keep it in line with how the rest of the model looks. And obviously you can paint the sword however you like, but I just thought that looks better. It's just a different way of looking at the model and thinking, well, you know, it's a different point of interest in the model because it's shinier than the rest. Make sure that you actually do the edges properly, because sometimes on these plastic models the edges of the swords ain't really smooth. So sometimes you can get a bit of like flash on it and it's not super smooth, so it can look like some parts darker than the others. So just make sure you do the edges properly, and that's the sword done. And actually that's the model done now. You've finally done it, well done. And with a bit of quick basing, this is very simple basing, but I think it works really well. Obviously it's the same basing style as the rest of my army. I've kept it simple, and I've also done a nice back room around to keep it nice and tidy. Obviously everyone else has their own basing technique, so I'm not going to be showing you how I do that. I could show in a later video how I do that, but that is the model done. I hope you all liked this video. If you did, please consider liking it and sharing it with anyone you think might also enjoy it. If you'd like to see more of this type of video, please consider subscribing, and don't forget to paint and play.